It's April 1971, and British Leyland unveils what they believe will be their salvation. The Morris Marina rolls off the production line at Cowley, Oxford, promising to compete with Ford's mighty Cortina and reclaim Britain's streets from the Blue Oval's dominance. Over the next 9 years, more than 800,000 of these cars will be sold in the United Kingdom alone, with total production including the Morris Ital variant exceeding 1.2 million units worldwide. In 1973, the Marina achieved second place in Britain's sales charts with 115,000 registrations, trailing only the Cortina's 181,000. Yet today, mention the Marina to any car enthusiast, and you'll likely see them wince. The BBC's Top Gear repeatedly dropped pianos on them. Automotive historians place it on worst cars ever made lists. The car has become a punchline, a symbol of everything that went wrong with British industry in the 70s. How does a car achieve such commercial success, selling over 1 million units worldwide and becoming Britain's second bestseller in 1973, and simultaneously earn a reputation as one of the worst vehicles ever made? For those of us who remember the 70s, the Marina was everywhere in driveways, taxi ranks, and police fleets across Britain. Your neighbour probably owned one. Your driving instructor might have taught you in one. The car was as common as rain in Manchester. But here's the fascinating contradiction. While Ford built the Cortina Mark III on a thoroughly modern platform with contemporary engineering, British Leyland essentially raided their parts bin, bolted components together, and hoped for the best. The Marina used front suspension components from the Morris Marina, a car designed in 1948. Think about that for a moment. Britain was putting 1970s styling onto a chassis architecture that predated the Korean War. This is the story of ambition meeting compromise, of a company trying to save itself while fighting with one hand tied behind its back. It's a tale that says as much about British industry in the 70s as it does about the car itself. And for those of us who lived through that era, it's worth remembering that the Marina's story isn't just about automotive failure. It's about what happens when commerce, politics, and engineering collide in an industry fighting for survival. Section 1. The Impossible Birth. British Leyland formed in 1968 through the merger of British Motor Holdings and Leyland Motor Corporation, creating Britain's largest automotive manufacturer. By 1970, the company found itself in crisis. Ford's Cortina dominated the family car market, and the lucrative fleet sector, representing up to 60% of all medium car sales, shunned British Leyland's front-wheel drive offerings in favour of Ford's simplicity and perceived reliability. Lord Stokes, the company's chairman, gave the engineering team an impossible task: design, develop, and bring to market a competitor to the Cortina in just 3 years. Most car manufacturers needed 4 to 5 years for such a project. The budget was tight, the timeline absurd, and the political pressure immense. The British government had invested heavily in the merger and expected results. Harry Webster, the engineering director, knew they couldn't design a completely new car in that time frame, so they raided the parts bin with surgical precision. The front suspension came from the Morris Marina, a design by Alec Isigonis that dated back to 1948, using longitudinal torsion bars for springing with lever arm dampers. The rear axle was borrowed from existing Morris products. The engines were carryovers, the A-series engine from the Mini producing 60 horsepower at 5,250 RPM, and the B-series from the MGB, offering 82.5 horsepower in standard form. The styling assignment went to Roy Haynes, who worked under strict parameters. Ironically, Haynes had been poached from Ford in October 1967, where he'd styled the Cortina Mark II. He knew exactly what fleet buyers wanted. Haynes delivered a boxy 3-box design that looked unremarkably like every other family saloon of the period. It wasn't offensive, but it wasn't inspired either. Haynes left British Leyland in 1969 after either falling out with management or not fancying a move to Birmingham, depending on which side of the story you believe, leaving Harris Mann to complete the production details. British Leyland offered the Marina in several variants, two-door and four-door saloons, a coupe, and later an estate. At launch, trim levels ranged from deluxe and super deluxe to TC, with the twin-carb version. Engine options ranged from a 1.3-litre unit to a 1.8-litre engine. For those wanting something sportier, there was the TC model with the twin-carb version producing 94.5 horsepower, though calling it sporty required considerable generosity. Production began on April 27, 1971, at the Cowley plant in Oxford, with a night shift added in May 1971. At that time, the manufacturers reported they were producing 2,000 cars per week, projecting over-optimistically to increase this to 5,000 cars per week by the end of 1971. Section 2. The Dangerous Launch. British Leyland invited members of the press to a pre-launch in Cannes in early 1971, where journalists Jeff Daniels and Doug Nye were given a 1.8 TC to try and found the car to be dangerous. The rushed final stages of design and production, especially regarding the suspension, meant that many press fleet cars had an incorrect front suspension setup, whereby there was no camber change when the car rolled, which produced almost heroic levels of understeer. Excessive understeer resulted in the car ending up on the wrong side of the road on a tight bend, and Daniels contacted Harry Webster and persuaded him to rethink the design. Webster made a last-minute fix to the front suspension on the 1.8-litre cars. Very early 1.3s and 1.8s had the same suspension setup that the motoring press complained about at the time the car was launched, with the changeover point to improved front suspension geometry, generally recognized as occurring during late 1971. This was a particular problem with the more powerful 1.8 and 1.8 TC cars, which were unfortunately the models the press were most likely to test. The 1.3-litre models, having a lighter engine, didn't suffer from the problem to the same extent. Still, the damage to the car's reputation among motoring journalists had been done before most buyers ever sat in one. Section 3. Against all odds, commercial success. Despite the pre-launch drama, the Marina sold. 11 months after launch, on March 29, 1972, the 100,000th Marina, a 1.8 TC version, emerged from the Cowley plant, and by February 1973, the company was able to announce that 250,000 Marinas had already been built in less than 2 years. In 1972, the Morris Marina achieved 104,986 sales and 6.4% market share. In 1973, the Marina jumped to second place with sales of 115,041 units, representing 6.9% of the market, trailing only the Ford Cortina's 181,616 units. This was the best ever year for the Marina, with 201,724 being manufactured in the 1972-73 financial year, ending September 30th. Fleet buyers loved the low purchase price and conventional layout. Driving schools appreciated the easy maintenance. Police forces ordered them in volume. Though officers quickly learned to avoid high-speed pursuits, the Marina's handling made such adventures inadvisable. The motoring press offered mixed reviews. Motor Magazine's Test praised the car's interior space and low price, but noted the rather dated handling characteristics. Autocar was more direct, describing the suspension design as a generation behind the competition. Road testers consistently criticized the handling, describing it as unpredictable in corners and prone to dramatic oversteer when pushed. But here's the thing, most buyers didn't care. Buyers chose the Marina mainly for value for money, and British Leyland regularly upgraded the trim and features of the models to keep them looking fresh and to offer good value compared to the Ford Cortina. They weren't reading road tests in enthusiast magazines. They walked into showrooms, saw a modern-looking car with a British Leyland badge at a price their budget could handle, and signed the papers. British Leyland exported the Marina globally, rebadging it as the Austin Marina in some markets including the United States, Canada, and various other countries. Overall, approximately 703,686, Morris Marinas were sold in the UK over its production run from 1971 to 1980. Total Marina production, including all variants, reached 809,612 units. Section 4. Evolution through compromise. The first change to the lineup was a 1.8-litre estate car launched in 1972, available only in Super Deluxe trim and costing £1,236. By May 1973, special edition fever was setting in with the production of 2,000 saloon-based 1.8-litre Jubilee models with tinted glass, laminated windscreen, opening quarter lights, coach line, vinyl roof, cloth seats, and a pair of auxiliary lamps. In October 1975, the Marina 2 arrived, with disc brakes at the front on all versions and modified suspension, including anti-roll bars all round on the saloons, coupes, and estates. Styling changes included fatter bumpers and a revised grille center. The TC model evolved into separate GT and HL badges, with the coupe and saloon versions receiving different designations. In September 1978, a revamped Marina debuted featuring styling changes front and rear to the bumpers and rear lights. More significantly, the old B-Series 1.8 engine was replaced by the more modern overhead cam O-Series 1.7-litre unit, bringing the car slightly closer to contemporary standards. In July 1980, British Leyland replaced the Marina with the Morris Itale, which featured large rear lamp clusters and a new front end designed by Harris Mann, though the 1971 vintage of the design was obvious. Itale Design had been involved in a consultancy role to help design new tooling and assembly methods, but despite bearing the studio's name, the Itale is absent from lists of styling jobs actually handled by the firm. The Itale lasted 4 years and was replaced by the Austin Montego in early 1984. Section 5. The problems that wouldn't die. Owners quickly discovered the Marina's shortcomings. The Morris Marina front suspension, using lever arm dampers that provided superior ride comfort over rough roads compared to early telescopic dampers, came at the expense of sloppy handling and body control at high speeds. The car developed a reputation for unpredictable handling, particularly in wet conditions. Push it hard into a corner, and the rear end would step out with alarming enthusiasm. Build quality varied dramatically depending on which day of the week your Marina was assembled. British Leyland's labour troubles in the 70s were legendary, with strikes disrupting production regularly. Quality control suffered. Panel gaps you could slide a finger through weren't uncommon. Interior trim pieces fell off. Electrical systems developed gremlins that baffled mechanics. Rust attacked Marinas with particular vigour. The wings rotted, the sills rotted, the floor pans developed holes. By the early 80s, 5-year-old Marinas with rust perforation weren't unusual. British Leyland's rust-proofing processes lagged behind Ford's, and it showed. Many Marinas that survived mechanical problems eventually succumbed to structural corrosion. The drivetrain proved more reliable than the rest of the car, ironically because British Leyland used proven components. The A-Series and B-Series engines were robust units that could withstand neglect. Mechanics knew them intimately, and parts were cheap and plentiful. A Marina might handle poorly and rust aggressively, but the engine would keep running sometimes long after the body had given up the fight. British Leyland's response to criticism was to make incremental improvements rather than addressing fundamental flaws. They added anti-roll bars to improve handling slightly. They revised interior trim to reduce rattles. They improved rust-proofing procedures somewhat. But they never fixed the basic problem. The Marina was built on compromises, and no amount of tweaking could overcome that foundation. Section 6. The Unexpected Legacy. When George Turnbull was hired by the Hyundai conglomerate in 1974 to head up their effort to create an indigenous Korean automobile, he brought with him from the UK 2 Morris Marinas, a coupe and a saloon, and hired a number of British engineers who had worked on the Marina project. Their first product, a reworked Marina equipped with Mitsubishi engines and transmissions, and a 4-door hatchback body restyled from the 2-door coupe by Ital-designed Giugiaro, was the Hyundai Pony, whose global success turned Hyundai into a major automotive manufacturer. This represents one of automotive history's great ironies. A car widely criticized as a failure in Britain became the foundation for one of the world's most successful automotive companies. The Marina's simple, conventional engineering, the very thing British journalists mocked, proved ideal for a developing automotive industry learning to build cars. The Marina became a cultural punchline, particularly in later years. Television shows mocked it. Comedians used it as shorthand for British industrial decline. When the BBC's Top Gear repeatedly dropped pianos on marinas or crushed them with caravans, they were reflecting a broader cultural narrative about the car's place in British automotive history. Yet, this mockery overlooks an important truth. For hundreds of thousands of British families, particularly in the fleet market where around 60% of sales went to businesses, the Marina provided straightforward transportation during economically difficult times. It got people to work, took families on holiday, and served faithfully in roles from taxi to patrol car. Many owners remember their Marinas fondly, not as engineering triumphs, but as honest, unpretentious cars that did their jobs without demanding perfection. Section 7. The rarest car in Britain. As of December 2019, there were currently 374 Marinas on the road in the UK, with a further 498 currently SORN. Most succumbed to rust decades ago. For a car that was once sold in its millions, the Marina and Ital was classed as the rarest car in Britain by the Sun newspaper. This rarity has created an odd collector's market. The Morris Marina Owners Club maintains a register of surviving examples and works to preserve these increasingly rare vehicles. Auction results from recent years show pristine examples fetching between £1,280 and £5,213, far more than their original purchase price when adjusted for inflation, though still modest by classic car standards. The Marina's reputation as one of Britain's worst cars isn't entirely fair, but it's not entirely wrong either. It was a product of circumstance created too quickly, with too little budget, by a company fighting for survival in an increasingly competitive global market. That it succeeded commercially while failing critically says something about the disconnect between what enthusiasts value and what ordinary buyers need. The Morris Marina sold over 1.2 million units worldwide and became Britain's second best-selling car in 1973. Yet it's remembered today primarily as an automotive cautionary tale. This contradiction reveals something essential about the British motor industry during that turbulent decade. Commercial success and engineering excellence had become divorced from each other. British Leyland's decision to build the Marina from existing components using suspension technology from the 1940s was pragmatic, but ultimately short-sighted. While they saved development costs and met their aggressive timeline, they created a car that couldn't evolve or improve beyond its fundamental limitations. Ford's investment in modern platforms for the Cortina paid dividends throughout the 70s, with the Mk3 selling over 1,100,000 units between 1970 and 1976. British Leyland's compromises haunted the Marina until production ended in 1984. Taken across the whole of the 1970s, the Morris Marina was the fourth best-selling car and British Leyland's second best-seller behind the Mini. This isn't the record of a complete failure. It's the record of a car that fulfilled its basic mission, providing affordable, conventional transportation while failing to achieve greatness. For those of us who remember that era, the Marina represents more than just one car's story. It symbolizes an industry struggling against global competition, government interference, labor disputes, and its own institutional problems. The engineers who designed it weren't incompetent, they were working under impossible constraints. The workers who built it weren't careless, they were fighting for their jobs in an industry undergoing painful transformation. Perhaps you learned to drive in a Marina. Maybe your father owned one, or you remember them lined up in taxi ranks outside railway stations. Some of you might have owned one yourselves, and if you did, I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Did your Marina serve you faithfully, or did it confirm every terrible thing ever said about them? What memories do you have of Britain's second best-selling car of 1973? The truth about the Morris Marina isn't simple. It was simultaneously a commercial success and an engineering compromise, a car that satisfied millions of buyers while disappointing automotive purists. It kept British Leyland alive when the company desperately needed a volume seller, yet it also represented everything wrong with the company's approach to car building. It became the foundation for Hyundai's automotive empire while rusting away on British streets. If you enjoyed this examination of automotive history, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We'll be exploring more stories from the classic car era, celebrating both triumphs and failures, because both have valuable lessons to teach us about ambition, compromise, and the realities of building cars in a changing world. Thank you for watching, and remember, every car, no matter how maligned, represents someone's dream of building something better. The Marina may not have achieved greatness, but it got hundreds of thousands of people where they needed to go, and in the end, for most of those buyers driving through the difficult days of 1970s Britain, that was precisely enough.